Hi everybody, it's Lisa here from Holistic Health by Lisa Moan, and I'm here tonight to talk about gluten and the impact that gluten can have on your child's mood and behaviour. So as I'm chatting, if you have any questions, of course, just type them in and I'll do my best to answer those as I'm talking. So I'll just start with the basics about gluten, because I guess we've all heard of gluten and gluten-free, but sometimes we're not actually quite sure what that means. So gluten is a protein and it's found in wheat, but it's also found in other grains like barley, rye and spelt. And that surprises people sometimes. They think it's just in wheat, but it is in other grains. And unless you are consciously eating a gluten-free diet, then your child is probably eating gluten about 3 or maybe more times a day, because they might be having Wheat Bix for breakfast, they might be having a sandwich for lunch, they might be having pasta at dinner. So there you go, that's three gluten-containing meals without even thinking about it. And probably, in my opinion, one of the reasons why we all have such a big problem with gluten now is that we have just eaten so much of it over the last 100 years or so. So it doesn't matter what the food, we shouldn't overeat foods. We should have diversity and we should rotate foods. So I think we've just overeaten gluten, and that's why we're all a bit sensitive to it now. So the focus tonight, it's not about sore tummies and the sorts of things you might imagine are associated with gluten, but we're going to be talking about why gluten actually has an impact on your child's mood and your child's behaviour. So we're going to talk about food allergies, food sensitivities, and then we're going to finish off just talking about leaky gut and why that is something important to consider. So we'll start off with food allergies. And when I was at school, I didn't know anybody with a food allergy. It was a completely non-event. There was no food allergies, there's no EpiPens, there was no allergy management plans. And now, of course, you walk into any school office and you've got the wall of anaphylaxis plans on the wall behind. So rates of food allergies have absolutely skyrocketed. And whenever you look at anaphylaxis plans and all those sorts of things, those are IgE allergies. So they're the immediate allergy where the child eats a food and they get hives or they get a rash or they get anaphylaxis immediately. So my son has quite a few IgE food allergies, and I know that because when he ate these foods for the first time, he had a massive reaction immediately. So I could go to the doctor and say, oh, he's allergic to lentils and chickpeas and green peas, blah, blah, blah. And he had a challenge test for sesame last week because it looked like he'd outgrown it. But by the time he got to eat 1 teaspoon of tahini, his eye started to swell up like the elephant man. So it was very quick, like he started to eat the tahini and his eye closed over. So those are IgE reactions. But there's other types of food allergies as well, and they're the IgG reactions. And they're much harder to pick because the reaction isn't immediate. The reaction can take 6 hours or the next day before it's apparent. So you can't really think, oh, my child has this issue now. What did they eat at lunchtime yesterday? It's really hard to piece it together like that. And the symptoms can also be a little bit different. So it's not the dramatic sort of closed eye or the anaphylaxis. It's more subtle reactions. And because the IgG reactions are often to really common foods like wheat and dairy, you never actually see your child without symptoms because they're eating the food so often that they haven't actually recovered from the last time they ate it when they eat it again. So it's really muddy and it's really hard to pull it apart. But if your child did have an IgG reaction to gluten, some of the symptoms might really surprise you of what the issues can be. So they can be really highly strung, excitable or agitated. And I'll just throw in a little fact here that a very high proportion of people with schizophrenia are actually intolerant to gluten. So that's the impact of the psychiatric symptoms that you can get from eating too much gluten. Your child might be inattentive, They might be impulsive or irritable or unable to concentrate. So you'll notice a lot of these symptoms. If you went to a doctor and said, my child is impulsive and unable to concentrate, you would head very quickly down the path of an ADHD diagnosis, whereas possibly your child just has a food allergy to gluten. They can get hyperactive, repetitive, loud talking, and even stuttering. They can be short-tempered, moody, or have problems with their handwriting. And so the quickest, easiest way to find out if your child has an IgG reaction to food is to do a blood test. So, of course, nobody wants to do a blood test with their child, but it means you get a result really quickly. And then you have a piece of paper that you and your partner can sit down and say, you know, we have a blood test. We can see that our child's not reacting to gluten very well. We need to cut it out. So it can be very useful to do that test. And just shoot me a message if you want to find out more about that test and how it works and how to organise it. So then there's food sensitivities, and they're different to food allergies because it's not involving the immune system. So proper allergies, whether they're IgE or IgG, they involve the immune system, but food sensitivities don't. So a food sensitivity is when a child eats gluten but they can't process it properly. They don't have the right enzymes and tools in their body to break it down. And whenever they can't break down the gluten properly, it forms something in their body called gliadorphin. And that forms in their brain. And listen to the end of the word, the orphan. So same as morphine. So it actually acts like morphine in your child's brain. So whenever they're eating gluten, they're not breaking down the gluten properly, and it's acting like a drug in their brain. So think of what the symptoms of having morphine are. A really obvious one is constipation, which is not related to mood, but that's a good sort of, you know that if you have too many painkillers, you end up very constipated. But other issues that you have, if you have a morphine or a gliadorphin in your bloodstream, is you can have problems with your speech and your hearing. So think of auditory processing disorder, any sort of speech issues. You could have spaciness or brain fog. I've got a bit of brain fog after 6 weeks of summer holidays though. Frequent fatigue, moodiness, irritability and aggression, anxiety, depression, and difficulty with sleep. So have a think about if you're watching this video, I'm sure your child has some of these issues. So think maybe could this be a problem for them? And why this might happen is because people can actually be missing the enzyme that they need to break down the gluten. So think back to your science class about the role of enzymes and reactions. So if they're missing the enzyme that's needed to break down gluten, then that's when it could form these opioid-like compounds, the morphine-like compounds in their brain. And it could even be that they just don't have enough zinc for those enzymes to work right. So they have the enzyme, but because they're zinc deficient, the enzyme doesn't work. And so many children are zinc deficient because they're not eating, red meat, nuts and seeds, oysters, probably not. So children can really quickly end up being zinc deficient. And unfortunately, if your child has this problem with gluten, they probably have it with dairy too. So to actually get rid of these symptoms of brain fog and anxiety, you might need to remove both. And whether you do those together or separately is really up to you. There's pros and cons of both. And if your child's a really picky eater, not only will that make them deficient in zinc, but they could be picky because they're actually addicted to the gluten because of this morphine opioid-like compound in the brain, which is obviously addictive. So they're actually addicted to the gluten. So the kids that come to see me and they won't eat anything but white pasta, sometimes this is their issue. And once you remove the pasta, even just by changing to gluten-free pasta, which is not a very healthy food, but it does the job, even just by switching to gluten-free pasta, then they will try other foods because they're not addicted anymore. So the final thing we'll talk about now is leaky gut and leaky brain. So it's a bit of a buzz term for the last sort of 5 years. So you might have heard of leaky gut, but not really known what it is. So basically, the cells in your gut lining should be like that. So all really nice, close, tight up to each other. But whenever somebody has leaky gut, the cells move apart, and this is the leakiness. So the gaps in the lining of your gut wall, and that's where a lot of issues come into play. So leaky gut is associated with allergies, autism, autoimmune disorders, all because particles of food are getting into your bloodstream that shouldn't be. And what does this have to do with gluten? Well, gluten is actually implicated in the development of leaky gut. So eating gluten frequently can lead to leaky gut, because when you eat gluten, your body releases a substance called zonulin, and zonulin, which is the compound that makes those cells go apart. And they only go apart temporarily. So if you eat gluten, and then a week later you eat gluten again, and then a week later you eat gluten again, the cells will have opened for 6 hours and then gone back together for the other 6.5 days. But if you're eating gluten every 6 hours or every 3 hours, then they're never getting a chance to recover. So they're permanently open, and you've got a permanently leaky gut. And the zonulin that your body releases, thank you. The zonulin that your body releases can actually go straight to your brain and cause leaky brain as well. So that's another reason why it's really implicated in mood and behaviour and things like autism. So if you want to improve your child's mood and their behaviour, reducing that inflammation in their gut and healing their gut is a really good place to start. And you'll see improvements really quickly in things like their skin, so that's sort of a side benefit, but also their language, their mood, their behaviour, anxiety, all those sorts of things. So I know it's really daunting, even though you understand, hopefully now, the reasons why gluten can be bad for your mood and for your behaviour. It can be very daunting to actually make those changes, especially with picky eaters. So to make it super easy, I've put a gluten-free, dairy-free recipe book for free on my website. I'll post a link to it below, so download that. It's like a 3-day meal plan with all the recipes and chopping lists and everything. Very kid-friendly. So try that for a few days, see how you get on. If you still need more help, just give me a shout and you can just come and have an appointment and I can help you with that. Otherwise, next week we'll be talking about lunchboxes, and I'll try and sort of take some of the fear out of another term of lunchboxes for you. So any questions or comments, just type them below. Otherwise, I'll see you next week and we'll talk about lunchboxes. So thank you very much for listening.